Welcome to Human Marketing, a weekly podcast for B2B marketers, unpacking how brands can stay authentic, demonstrate authority, and build trust as AI floods our feeds with content. I'm Chris Nelson, founder of Human Video. We remotely produce podcasts and other video content with real humans and just the right amount of soul. Welcome to the Human Marketing Podcast, Joe.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. And as we're getting started, let me start off by just saying that you've been wonderful. You've been wonderful in the few minutes that we've been speaking, but also in our previous interactions, whether that's through TMM stuff or even just arranging this podcast. So thank you for being a completely wonderful human.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. As you mentioned there, we've kind of been chatting back and forth a bit between you and your team as well. I've been a massive fan of the Marketing Meetup and everything that you've kind of built over that time, over the years. And I was kind of motivated to, I guess, especially with the creation of my new business, I kind of wanted to enjoy that. I wanted to kind of dive into that world of being in a room with a safe space with other marketers. And, I really value in-person meetings. I kind of often say meeting in person is just the best form of outreach and communication, and the second best is video, which is my world. So I was really keen, and I'm looking at lots of different ways to just kind of do in person more. And I looked up the website and said, where's my Belfast, my next Belfast event? And there wasn't one, and which is grand. And I reached out to you guys and I was like, look, has there ever been one? Am I missing something? And you're like, no, there actually hasn't. Would you like to do one, Chris? So it sounds like you're volunteering, and we're on that journey. But my first, step in that journey, as well as having great conversations with you guys, was to take the 2-hour journey down the road to Dublin.
Great.
Which I did about a month ago, and it was wonderful. I got to experience everything that I'd heard about it, and the welcome at the extreme welcome at the door by multiple people, which was great. We'll get into this, but you tell the story of kind of not being comfortable in those situations is why you kind of created the whole thing, and I totally felt that. I'm not somebody that is totally comfortable walking into a room full of 50 people even and having, starting those conversations. But everything about it made that, facilitated that and made it really easy. And I had a wonderful night down in Dublin, met loads of people. I'm connected to so many more people down there now. And it has absolutely brought to life for me the whole experience. So I was wondering, as on the back of that, could you just tell me a little bit about your story? Please feel free to tell that story of what motivated you to start an in-person marketing event organization, I guess, and what led up to that and what that has become.
It's weird. So in the week that we're speaking, then it's 9 years since I held my first event. So I think it was on Tuesday that I held my first event for the Marketing Meetup, which is crazy. And sort of, I guess, backtracking to that day 9 years ago, then I feel like this is a story I've told a lot, but I feel like it's one of those stories that is important because hopefully it resonates on an emotional, human level more than it does sort of just being a story. And the reason for that is that my story starts from a place of fear, really, of walking into those spaces, but also disappointment, probably. That the moments where I did pluck up the courage to say hello to someone else, then my humanity was more judged by whether I was deemed to have an important job title or budget rather than the contents of my character. And so if I see a problem, I'm generally someone who tries to do something about it. And in this instance, the doing something about it was running a local event to me. I called it the Cambridge Marketing Meetup at the time. It was held in a canteen in the Redgate Software building, a buffet, one speaker, and eventually, about 6 months later, And that's a bit of a spoiler, the instruction to be positively lovely. Um, really, for me, it was the ambition was achieved from day one. I walked into this space and people were looking after each other and enjoying each other, and like that was enough. But what started happening was people started coming up to me and sort of saying, much like the interaction you've described, I'd love this thing closer to my house. And I was like 24 at the time. I was just messing about and said, well, go on then, off you go, type thing. I'll support you if I can. And so that's how we grew out. In the first few years, like it grew out, and it was evenings and weekends. I was working full time at an agency at the time, and so it wasn't my job. It was something I was doing in my spare time. Um, but come April 2019, I think we had 130 events scheduled across 13 locations, and that was enough to take the leap to go full time. Um, COVID happened, and all those events got cancelled, which was a shame because we just picked up our first event in New York. Um, but fortunately, we shifted very, very quickly into online events. And if I pat myself on the back for anything in that transition period, I think is that we just moved very quickly. Like within a week of cancelling the events, we were sort of had you know, an industry leading webinar program, which was like properly great. At that time, we had a mailing list of about 2,863 people, I think. Um, but over these past 5 years, then we've grown the community to 250,000, and we've picked up in-person events again, as you've spoken about there. So we now run 50 webinars per year, 150 events from London to Tokyo. And in the meantime, just like the thing that sort of stayed true to everything is like this spirit of being positively lovely and just looking after each other. It's not mad. It's not overblown. It's very simple. It's a very human interaction. But I think core to me as a founder and someone who enjoys the product as much as anyone else does, it's because it's a safe space where folks can come together, and I just know how it feels to not feel safe, and not feeling safe is not a nice thing. And so to be able to walk in and be in a space where people have their best intentions at heart, it's gorgeous, mate. It's a really lovely human experience. So that's the most important thing.
I love that. And as I said, I really experienced that. I really felt it in the event. Like, just to, I guess, explain to listeners a little bit about everything that happens at it. There's, beer and pizza, drinks. There's a lot of kind of initial connecting and chatting in a really safe, relaxed way. The thing that stood out was the kind of be positively lovely. I absolutely love that. It's a really it's a rare thing in that setting, I find. Like, quite often these events are super corporate. They're that whole thing of some people are there to learn, I guess, maybe, and others sometimes are there to sell, and that you're really intentional about, like, this is not a space where you're just kind of pitching at each other. It's a safe space, it's a very safe space to interact in a really wholesome way. And I totally felt that. And it was just instant. Like, as soon as you start having the conversation, you meet, like, you break through that fear, I guess, and it just, like, the natural things, or someone has just connected with you. I had a really funny moment, Joe, when I was doing the thing. I was standing there, like, looking slightly terrified, and these two amazing women, like, just bounced up to me and were like, "Chris," I froze, and I was like, oh no, I've no idea who you are. You obviously know me, but I don't know who you are. And they were like, and I was like, I had that look on my face of like, how do you know me? And they're like, dude, you got a name badge on, like, really, like. And that was the icebreaker, and I had a wonderful time then. And then obviously there was then everyone kind of sat down. There was a great panel at my event, which was really helpful, actually. There were a lot of students in the room, which was really nice for me as well. I was, in a rare position where I'm able to help other people as well. In my situation, and really near the end of the event, two 18-year-old Ukrainian commercial filmmakers found me, and I had a wonderful chat with the two of them, and they were asking 1,000 questions, and I was so delighted to connect with them, and I've still connected with them and helped them in various ways. But that just everything that happened there was just wonderful, and I got the full experience. And I think
Mate,
it's a wonderful thing that you've created, and
bless you.
I hope it keeps growing. And I'm intrigued about the COVID story as well. Like that was a massive thing for me at the time. I was charging around the world making films and planes. That was my life, and it just all stopped. And like you, I quickly kind of pivoted, and it was actually that was the start of doing what I'm doing now in terms of getting better at remote video production. And now I've built a career out of that. So it's interesting that, and now obviously webinars and everything is a big part of what you do as well. You're reaching more people. I'm sure it just I've seen your lives where you have an amazing numbers on your lives and the amazing interaction that brings. Like some of those have been great. Um, Thinking just about the whole in-person event thing, like I have seen across the world, particularly maybe in the past year or two, just this like real resurgence of in-person events in lots of different ways, like big events, uh, dinners, people just intentionally finding each other to have coffee. I see a lot of, I'm going to be in this city, like please LinkedIn people, like connect with me. Let's try and meet up in person. That seems to be something that people have yearned for more increasingly in the past year. What have you seen of that? Where do you think that's coming from? Have you seen it? I'm assuming you're kind of seeing these things as well, but it's as someone who's bringing people together in person, what have you seen in that, and what are your thoughts on all of that?
I think there is a magic to it, isn't there? And it's everything you've just described. I mean, I think I'll be retracing some old steps to a certain extent, and potentially not adding too much new to the conversation. But the example you've given there of meeting two Ukrainian young filmmakers and sharing some advice with them, had that come via a LinkedIn message, cold or whatever, you may have sort of still responded and tried to help, but the richness of that interaction would have just been, vastly inferior. And so I think what we can all acknowledge is just the serendipity of these wonderful occasions where people get together and we speak to. I love that you've had your own experience of it, and I love that sort of your own experience is duplicated across every person who attends one of our events or someone else's event, that they have that opportunity. And so quite often I'll speak about these things as the currency of these in-person events is opportunity, and it's you don't know what you're going to get out of it when you walk out the room, but you're being removed from a transactional culture, which is one which, will kind of exist in the online space where, hey, can you get, I can get you 10 new leads in the next month or you won't pay. We've all had the messages all the way through to, like people pitching cold email at you. There is something about those spaces where you walk in and you feel like when it's done well, like you are part of something and you're co-creating this experience, and there's a richness and there's a humanity to it. I can speak to the trends, like people wanting these things more after COVID and stuff like that. But I think principally, I think it's just like this stuff is good. And I think things have felt quite tough in our industry as well. And I think when things feel tough, then you have the response of being able to go into yourself or seek help from others. And the pleasant thing is that there is these sanctuaries and these communities and these spaces where folks can walk in and say, look someone in the eye and feel the presence of another person and simply know that they are not alone. And I think this becomes increasingly important, whether it's technological change with AI that sort of changes how we interact with machines as humanity, but also the fact that so many of us are sat in our home offices, as I am today, and, just crave being around other people. And I think, the only last thing I can add to this particular answer is like, I've been a huge proponent of working from home for as long as my career's gone on. I've sort of been in the workforce for 10 plus years now. Um, had a lovely time. But just recently I have experienced, that sort of feeling of like, maybe it'd be nice to not do another virtual meeting today. you know, maybe it would be nice to be sat across the table from someone, or, in a park and going for a walk or whatever it may be. And so, we've got plenty of these opportunities for virtual things. Maybe it's just a slight readdressing of the balance to these in-person experiences.
I totally see that, and even in my own world, like I'm on my own. I work from home, but I'm kind of cheating a little bit. Because of my filmmaking past, I have a studio that I get to, but I'm still kind of on my own here. But I find myself, anyone, like, it's kind of rare that it's somebody local that I'm meeting with for some reason. But if it is at all, I am like, we are having coffee. We're not like you're within an hour's drive for me. We're meeting up in person, because I do feel that really acutely. Um, but thinking of that, what I said earlier about sort of in person is the pinnacle, but then one step down from that is video. Like, you have developed this kind of cadence of webinars more on as part of your offering, and also I mentioned there the live experience. Just you're doing that really well. The interaction that comes with it is fabulous. Can you tell me a little bit about, like, um, how that has developed, like what you're getting out of that, why you sort of see the growth in that, I guess, and also how that, yeah, well, if it in particularly the live, I'm really interested in live, as that, just that kind of interactive experience, because there's a lot of video. I mean, I was uh, just before this, I was on with somebody recording another podcast, and they were talking about the lack of feedback, I guess, particularly even maybe in a podcast production. Like, the viewer or the listener knows you so well, and you have no idea that they're even there. Whereas the live thing seems to, I mean, you're just seeing the way you're doing it. There's a lot of interaction in the comments. How have you kind of translated that into the live experience, and why are you kind of pushing that, I guess?
Yeah. Um, so the way that we think about it is twofold. There's so many different directions this question can go. So like,
Sorry,
I
yeah,
drew
it's a little bit open.
no, no,
Yeah.
well, no, not sorry. My answer. The question was
Okay.
beautiful. So like, so um, so the way that we think about on a very high level when we think about video and live streaming video and webinar based content at the Marketing Meetup is splitting up video versus in person. And what we're not saying that neither of these platforms can't do the other thing, but what we're saying is that for us, the live streaming is predominantly for education, and the in person is predominantly for connection. And if you think about the Marketing Meetup, we say that we'd like to educate, connect, and build confidence in marketers. And if we can do those things, then we're doing them great. And so, education, online, in person, connection. Um, I think what has been a wonderful experience there is that, well, twofold things really. The first advantage is, of course, the reach. So folks can tune in from across the world, and they do. So when we sort of introduce the webinar at the beginning and say, drop in the chat where you're watching from, we get folks from Basel in Switzerland, from South Africa, from America, from Australia, and of course a lot of folks from the UK. But to see that global reach coming through is just fabulous. And of course, that wouldn't be able to be possible without doing those things virtually. From a community perspective, of course, that has a huge advantage because we're starting to build out the community in spaces that we're not physically. And so we spoke about this even yesterday in our strategy meeting where we were like, well, maybe we start to do a little bit more targeting in America right now and try to build out an audience there. Um, but rather than looking to spin out another 50 in-person events in America, why don't we just do some more specific targeted advertising in America and see if folks pick up the virtual stuff? And then we can follow that through with the in-person stuff. So that's really, really great. The second is, of course, the chat feature, and you pointed to it, and like I, I don't do the comparison game because like it's comparison is the thief of joy, but it's also the most arrogant thing of like, you know, saying you're the best at whatever, but like, that being said, I am proud of the chat feature and the culture that we've built in our webinars where folks do interact and help each other and speak and make connections. And like, I've heard so many stories of people who met each other in a webinar, connected on LinkedIn, then ended up becoming great mates and stuff like that. And so those interactions probably would never have happened if it wasn't in that situation, because, you know, maybe it's people who are in South Africa versus America or the UK and they happen to connect. Or maybe, you know, they just couldn't make the in-person event on a Tuesday. So there are so many things. Really, for us, the webinars has been the growth engine in terms of new folks finding the Marketing Meetup over the past few years. The newsletter is the thing which continues that engine chugging along, but the webinars is the thing. And so it's been phenomenal. And really, you know, as I said in the initial story, you know, that sort of mailing list of 2,000 people is not that number anymore. And we definitely attribute that to the webinars being like a really, really important part of that. And so like, it's just a glorious experience. And the last thing I'll say is like, we referenced this before we went live, but like, I had the opportunity to sit down with like Seth Godin and stuff like that. And like, I don't think that I would necessarily get in the studio with Seth Godin unless I specifically went over to New York and sort of sat down with him. He's not coming to me. Um, and so the exposure to some of the best marketing minds ever is facilitated through those live conversations, which is wicked, you know. So we're in a lovely spot with it. And I'm a huge proponent of webinars and live stream video done well. I mean, it seems to be an increasing force in the marketing world for sure.
I love that, and I love what you picked up on the end there, because like one other, I guess, thing that sits aside that for you is your podcast as well. And like one of the main things we do is help businesses produce video podcasts and all the advantages that that comes with in terms of repurposing and whatnot. But we advocate for I guess for this, you know, for remote production as I guess a preference, exactly for why you said, you know, there's it's such an easier ask to say to Seth, you know, do you have an hour, you know, at where you are in your setup, instead of either like, can we fly you to London, which people do, you know, but it's a whole other expense and a massive time difference for your valued guest, you know. And it's I love that you picked that up. But I'd love to just ask you a little bit about the podcast, if that's okay. Like I'm these may be slightly like odd questions, maybe given your expertise around the event world, but I'd love to just dive a little bit into that, Joe, in terms of the I guess your kind of podcasting journey. Like I've only been producing for years, but this is like my first podcast hosting, I guess. I spent a whole career behind a camera, very intentionally, never being seen or heard, Joe, and I've been on a journey for that, but I'm massively enjoying the process of just kind of sitting down with people and having a really intentional conversation, much like those coffees that I would have with somebody down the road. And it's just like, it's really valuable. It's super intentional. It's just two people having a conversation. But I'd love to hear about how your podcast has also like helped with the growth of everything, the content that has been generated from that. You know, that you mentioned, we keep talking about Seth, but I watched the Seth Godin episode last night because it was reference to something that we're going to talk about later as well. But like, that still exists. That was over a year ago, and it's sitting there on YouTube. It's gathering, you know, it's completely evergreen. People are discovering it for, you know, from nowhere, from maybe not knowing anything about the Marketing Meetup. You know, how has that been part of your kind of growth and your kind of content engine, I think, as well, in terms of what you then can put out, and what maybe just a little thought on like how other businesses, particularly in the B2B world, which is the kind of the audience of this podcast, how that can help them.
Yeah, lovely. So the way that we've operated, I'm going to answer this in two ways. So forgive me, but it's relevant to something that's happening right now. So the way that the podcasts have sat as part of our content engine to date is that we would record the live webinar, and then after the webinar, we would take the audio from said webinar and pop it up on the Marketing Meetup podcast as well. Um, and so it is a way of making the content work harder and presenting it in a different format. It's relatively low effort in terms of the content has already been produced, and the session is there already, so it's just being presented differently. I think one of the principal thoughts that is important here more than anything is that you're meeting people where they are. And so I speak to people who say, I love watching the webinars. I love being there live, or I love watching them back, and watching them back on YouTube or whatever it may be. But you also meet a bunch of folks who say, I listen to you all the time when I'm walking the dog, or I'm on my horse, or, I'm in the car, or whatever it may be. And, this is just an example of like taking the asset and meeting people where they are and their consumption habits. And so, for me, if I wasn't on the live webinar doing it, I'd be far more likely to join afterwards and listen to the recording, unless it was a guest I wanted to specifically ask a question to, or I knew that I wanted to meet certain folks in the session itself. Um, and so I think it's a bit of a no-brainer to sort of be taking these pieces of content and be shifting them to podcast in that kind of way, in this specific flow. What we are doing right now is, and I haven't told anyone about this outside of TMM, so like this is new stuff. Is we're about to launch a new content thread which will be podcast led, and so rather than a live streamed event like the webinars that we run today, we're going to be going out and running a podcast where we will be interviewing folks, and it will be delivered as a podcast first and then the content afterwards. So it's a flip on what we've been doing to date. The reason for this is twofold. So the first is a little bit like what we've just spoken about. So the folks that we would like on the podcast are folks that are probably a little bit more inaccessible. Their calendars don't have the flexibility to show up at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, sorry. And so we can meet them on a Thursday in London and record a session, or we can do something virtually or whatever it may be. And then we've got that opportunity to get access to someone we wouldn't have done otherwise because of calendar stuff, which is great. The second is that when we're not running it as a live stream thing, then we can start to think of it as a little bit more of a social first kind of experiment. And so here, clipping becomes really important. So one of the disadvantages of our live stream setup at the moment is, for example, it's optimized for landing on people's screens at the right time and, in the right fidelity and, sort of not be laggy. But what that means is it's recorded at like 720p or whatever, which, or even 480 sometimes. And so, we know that we can push the podcast quality through, recording in 4K or at 1080p, with DSLRs or whatever it may be. And so we've used podcasts in a couple of different ways, either to repurpose or to create brand new content. I'm relatively bullish about it in the sense that, like, I think podcasts can be done really well and have great impact because you get so much longer with folks in their ears. Um, the flip side is I think those initial stages of running a podcast can be so demotivating as well because, like, certainly in the first instances, you're not going to be seeing large listening figures, and it is a bit of a momentum game. The last part of your question was around sort of like how folks in B2B situations can use it though. And like, content aside, I think it's just a fabulous relationship builder. Like, it is a flattering thing to be asked to be on a podcast. And like, I absolutely would have spent the time with you if this wasn't a podcast recording situation. But, I think we both share a similar disposition. But there are folks who are just busy or like don't necessarily want to spend half an hour taking random coffee chats. And in those instances, that's absolutely fine. But if the ask is, can we share your knowledge because I think you're amazing, I think it's a flattering thing. And like, I'll look back on today and I'll go, I spent an hour with Chris, and in the same way as someone else would. And I think that relationship builder is not to be used manipulatively, but is absolutely a tangential benefit to recording podcast content as well.
100%. Like I even, some like because some people, the bad way to do that is like I've heard people say like do a podcast, just invite all your prospects, like just trick them into coming on, and you get the opportunity. Like it's just so disingenuous. I always think it's an awful idea, and I don't even know how they do it. But people advocate for that a lot, and I certainly don't. I think it should always be this really intentional conversation. And like there's somebody I've been connected with for a while on LinkedIn there, and we've had some great conversations back and forth. And we were like on the cusp of having quite a deep conversation about something. And I said, like, you know what? It was a guy called Chris. Let's come on to my podcast. Like let's have that conversation, but let's record it. Like this will be really great. And it was just those moments of already, like, it was already happening. It was already great. It's going to be a great conversation. I'm like, no, absolutely. Let's record this. And he's totally up for it, which is fabulous. But yeah, I agree with all of that. I love the fact that you're kind of now doing another thread that's really intentionally podcast first. That's it's kind of reassuring for me, Joe, to be honest. It's great. But I'm also really excited to see like what that feels like, because the lives are a bit more kind of all go. Is that fair? Like you're reacting to stuff, and there can be there's a lot of like back and forth, which is really energetic, but the podcast can be that more intentional, just like I really want to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I've got I think you need a fair amount of patience to be able to listen to me in conversation, to be honest. Like, I've got a slow voice, whether I'm live or recording a podcast, but I think, there's certainly something where you're not worrying about the tech quite as much, if you're recording a podcast, because, that the pressure it's not being beamed out to several hundred or several thousand people at a time. It's just, you know, you can start the conversation with, don't worry if you say something you don't want in the recording afterwards, because we can edit it out. Whereas in a live streaming context, you can't do that. Which we curate our guests in such a way where most of them are open and fine with being transparent and have the relevant permission from their company anyway. But for some folks, it would definitely be a comfort thing, particularly those who are a little bit less experienced doing
Sure.
these things.
Yeah. I hope I said before we clicked record, I was like,
Yes, you
this
did.
isn't live TV, is my line, and for that very reason, it's often to just put people at ease, quite often, like, not necessarily this podcast, but when I'm a really good example is when we create customer testimonials for our clients, and that could be with with just a senior, fairly random person maybe in a company, like the champion in a company that knows my customer the most or has experienced it. Could be an engineer in a software company. It could be someone who just like has never been on video possibly. And there's a real role there, I think, for a producer in our case, to put people at ease and to say, like, this is a safe space, that we're not trying to trick you out here. You'll get to see this before it appears anywhere, but also just like stop. It's okay to just stop, take a drink, ask a question about the question. Like, all those things are really important in the production of great video. But I love that that's the format, and that is a shift, in terms of what you create. That's really exciting, and I'll absolutely look forward to seeing where that goes. The mentioned we've kind of referenced it a few times, but I rewatched the Seth Godin episode because one of the things you talked about there was, I guess, the rise of AI, and particularly I think the title includes the words AI and ethics. But what I thought would be really interesting was 14 months on from the recording of that. You see where this is going, Joe. You know what? I feel like it's just been a roller coaster since then. I feel like even the past few months from my world, so I focus quite heavily on the rise of like AI video, the use of AI avatars replacing real humans. I've kind of built a whole company around like almost opposing that particular use case, I suppose, like the importance of sitting down with real people, humanizing brands, getting a company's real humans out into the world to be themselves. I think there's a real value in that. I think it's the ultimate trust builder. It's which is just so important. But I see lots of things appearing kind of threatening that, I guess. I also would say I'm a massive advocate for using AI in lots of wonderful ways. I use it every day in the running of my business. Even AI video, there can be great use cases. Like my favorite at the moment is the kind of translation of videos into other languages, and to now that means translating it in your own voice and your own tone of voice, perfect lip sync. Like it's mind blowing, and that could just be like in my favored platform of choice, Wistia, for hosting videos. They have a fabulous facility out those guys. So I had Sam Bolter, who's the head of content at Wistia, on the podcast. Fabulous. And I've been a Wistian for 11 years, Joe, and I love everything they do, and especially their content creation. They're good. It is absolutely a lot. The world could learn a lot on content creation from them. But now it's just a drop down menu. Would you like which particular country of Arabic would you like? It's like, would you like this translated? There's like 180 different languages. It's that just feels like a wonderful globalization opportunity where someone, a company maybe in the US has created 200 really useful videos in English, and to be able to open that up to completely new markets. Like even doing sort of Spanish and French opens you up to South America and most of Africa and things like that. It's amazing. So that's great AI, right? But thinking back to your conversation with Seth 14 months ago, everything you were talking about then, what have you seen? I mean, it just feels like a really fast moving progression. How do you feel about that, particularly in the B2B marketing world, and the application of it, and potentially the misuse of that, or the less helpful ways to use that in terms of helping B2B marketing activities, I guess?
It's such a big conversation, right? And I think I increasingly I'm of the perspective that the way that we speak about AI today will be in the same way as we speak about doing something on the internet. In 15 so like in 15 years, I don't think we'll be pointing out AI did this or AI did that. We'll just be saying, in the same way as today we don't say I created a graphic on the internet. It's just
On the
not a
World
thing.
Wide Web. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think in a way that particular genie is out of the bottle, in terms of whether AI is a thing, or indeed whether you should be using it. I think there are some ethical concerns around environmental stuff in particular, and copyright, that is very, very valid and right to point out in part of these conversations. Um, but that being said, if we do accept that framing of like, you know, someone turning around in 15 years and sort of saying the same as the internet example, then I think it's quite hard to not be on this train and grow a business in the same way as it'd be hard to grow a business today without the web. Um, And so therefore we're left here, with what is rapid change, and rapid change is hard and scary and yeah, disorientating and uncertain. And uncertain is an emotion that I particularly struggle with, because uncertainty is not a pleasant place to be in. Some people embrace it, but that's not necessarily my perspective. I go to fear first, and then I find comfort later. And when change happens so quickly, then it is a fearful thing. And so one needs to acknowledge these things, and sort of say that it is both scary and exciting. And it's funny to observe how people speak about AI, because they will quite often say a series of negative statements, and then they need to caveat it at the end with, "Oh, but I'm very excited." And, like, exactly, and it made me smile, because that's what everyone does, and because you don't want to be seen as a Luddite either, and sort of
100%.
behind the
That's the word I use. Yeah.
post. And so it's hard, to sort of strike that balance. But what we just need to acknowledge is this is a period of change, and being resistant to that change, in a being resistant to that change, I think harms uh, us potentially. I think it gives us a critical lens to look at these new tools available to us, and sort of say, okay, I'm not going to be wholly accepting of everything just because it's got an AI badge on it. But similarly, if we are wholeheartedly rejecting AI because it is new, it is different, then I think similarly that puts us at a disadvantage. And therefore, I sort of point to examples in the same way as you do, where I go, okay, I'm not going to use it in this way, but I am going to use it in this way. So in a video content example, the other day I actually produced a video for Wistia, funnily enough, and sent it to their team. So I spent like 4 hours creating this video. It was a video which was addressed to camera in the same way as we're having this conversation. Um, it cut in a bunch of scenes from their previous content marketing, which is fabulous, which also includes AI scenes, by the way.
Oh, I know.
And so
Yes.
I
Yeah.
into those.
They're
Um,
quite vocal about
and
that, which is great. Yeah.
yeah, and I cut in some of Marketing Meetup footage as part of it too. But there was this moment in this particular video where, like, there was like a 3-second gap where I wanted to do a bit of voiceover, um, to make a specific point, and I think it was about shouting from the mountains about Wisteria or something like that. And I didn't have a clip that was appropriate for that, and so I went into VO and I just typed the prompt in and got a video that was, like, adequate enough for those 3 seconds. And so, like, you go, "Okay, cool," right time, right place, it was making the point that I wanted to make. Didn't take the humans out of the equation, but it did enable me to authentically get across my message, you know? Um, there was no less authenticity in this exchange, in this video, because I used AI. It was just a tool that I used to get across my message better. And so I guess, the point of encouragement really, when I think about this, is like, recognizing, as we've spoken about, that change is scary, and that's okay to feel that way. Recognizing that it can be lovely to try and embrace these changes, if you want to, but also reject the ones you don't want to. Um, but then finally, place these things in context, and if you can find them useful, and critically think about how you're going to apply them, then I think that's a good thing. Um, I think where people fall down is saying I am full AI or I am full not AI. And that is a tricky argument to justify in either circumstance. I don't think you run a great business by being full AI, and I don't think you run a great business by being not full AI, or not AI, So um, it's a rapidly changing thing, and it's a lot of emotions, but also a lot of excitement too. And there you go. I did a negative and a positive as well. So there you go.
Yeah. I mean, I totally feel the same way. I see the extreme version, and I push back against that. I guess the full AI. Like just this week, I came across a company that was posting ads on LinkedIn, and I was kind of drawn to. It leapt out to me because it was clearly an AI avatar, and it was an avatar of young woman talking about the product. And I kind of dived a bit deeper. I was intrigued at that point, because the like name of the company was something about building trust, but this, and I was like, okay, you're building trust, but your AI avatars. And then I looked at more of their ads. They had like fake podcast of two people, here, two AI avatars talking. I was just like, it wasn't even that great, you know. And then I went to the website, full of clearly AI created kind of stock photography. None of their humans. Nowhere on the whole thing. Even the copy was like pretty clunky. I suspect the whole website was AI generated, and it leapt out at me as like an extreme example of too much. Then there was thousands. There was no trust. I couldn't find a human. I even couldn't find any people working for the company in their LinkedIn page, which is like a massive red flag. I do know who the company really were or what was going on, but it lacked any humanity, and other folks are like, I've seen, and I have these very open conversations. I quite often DM folks who I see doing this stuff, and I just want to learn more about why they're doing it, how they're doing it, how it's being received is a really interesting thing for me. People doing entire podcast episodes with AI avatars, big, well-known companies, particularly maybe in the marketing world where they're dabbling with it more than most. But I'm really intrigued, and I always ask them, like, what's the feedback? How is this going down? And what I find more and more in my really intentional research is like human pushback against it, particularly the avatar thing. Maybe it's maybe it's specific to sort of the B2B world where they're just not keen on it. I don't know. I know it's massive in the consumer space, and maybe much more accepted by certain generations as well. But yeah, there seems to be a little bit of pushback against just blindly creating fake content, and only putting that out and not being, as you're, in your example, part of a bigger piece with humans.
That's it. I think I think the point that really sparks, in the story that you just told is the fact that they were positioning on trust. And it feels like if they were positioning on trust and then you felt like they weren't upholding that part of the trust, then I think that is like, it's just not good marketing as much as anything else. There was a quote from someone in one of our very early webinars, Margaret Malloy, who said, "A brand is a promise kept," and you can debate that definition, but I think what you can recognize is that a brand is saying you are these things and then delivering on those things. And if you have something which juxtaposes against those things, then that's not fabulous. And so I can see how in your experience that was jarred, and like it was probably it was about the AI, but it also wasn't about the AI. That was a marketing thing as well, right? And so it's it's curious, and um yeah, it's a curious and nuanced thing. And I think probably the thing which you also pointed to in what you were saying there is like maybe there's nuance in the customers, and a reminder to any marketer that you are not your customer. And maybe, as you said, in a generational perspective, maybe there's people. I don't tend to point to age demographics being a particularly relevant thing, but maybe there's a group of people who blooming love AI avatars and actually find that as a really big trust signal that someone's on the cutting edge, or whatever it may be. And in that situation, it would be wholly appropriate. So what we're speaking about is going back to the fundamentals of marketing and sort of saying, what's the promise that we're trying to make? What's the positioning? Who are we positioning to? And looking to understand all of these things and place that into the context of our business and our worlds, to get an outcome which feels appropriate for the people you're trying to reach. And it doesn't sound like you had that experience, but maybe other folks would, so.
Yeah, sure. No, I love that. And yeah, I think from a fundamental um good marketing point of view, I think especially in the B2B space, there's just so much value in humanizing your brand, and if you go too far down that route, you're losing that. Yeah, I feel, but there's a wonderful middle ground of like, I see so well, like Whiskey's a great example of like, and your example of VO3 of just like, I need this thing that I can't, like, I don't have time, I don't have a budget, I don't have a film crew to make this thing happen. It's really accessible now to add those wonderful additional pieces, and there are so many good marketing ways to use it, and other probably possibly pitfalls to avoid. Joe, that's a great place to come into land. I really appreciate your time. How can folks find out more about you, and crucially find all the great content that we've been talking about from the Marketing Meetup?
So folks head to the marketingmeetup.com. We've got all of our previous events. I think there's nearly 300 hours of webinars now recorded there, which is a labor of love, but also, a labor of community, which has been fabulous. Also, I just spend way too much time on LinkedIn. So if folks want to message there, then feel free to do so. Absolutely.
Tell me about it. I'm definitely, I need to like check myself every now and again. I'm like, oh, this is like good for my business. It's okay that I'm spending a ridiculous amount of my life on my phone or in LinkedIn, and it is often having wonderful conversations, but there's definitely a healthy balance, isn't there? I'll absolutely link to all of those things wherever this episode appears. I really appreciate your time, Joe. It's been a wonderful conversation. And I hope to kind of keep in touch and hopefully get the first ever Belfast Marketing Meetup happening. It needs to happen,
That'd be it. That'd be so lovely, mate. I'd love that. I really would. So let's make it happen.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joe.
Nice one. Cheers, Chris.